Hello everyone, and welcome to what I think is going to be a pretty fun video. I had the idea to go through all 36 nanos in the original game and rank them on a tier list and see which ones have the best powers, which ones have the worst powers, and everyone in between. So that's what we're going to do. Let's hop right into it. So the three main things we're going to be ranking them on are going to be, obviously, as I said before, the powers, good powers, bad powers, mix of both. That's going to be the main thing we look at. Piggybacking off of that, a second thing we're going to be looking at is availability. Certain nano powers are better or worse in certain parts of the game. So for example, run nanos are a lot more useful early in the game because of vehicles. You don't have access to vehicles early in the game, but once you have access to vehicles, the value of a run nano really decreases. Second of all, recall is another one that actually is the opposite. It gets more valuable later in the game, especially when you get to like Green Maw. There are a lot of platforming challenges that recall is very, very useful for compared to some of the earlier infected zones. And the final thing we're going to be looking at is flexibility. So basically the ability to fit in a nano stack in your 3 nano roster that you have in your nanocom while you play. So we're going to be looking basically for that, like, can they be replaced by another nano that does their job but better? That's going to be the main thing that we look for. So I made these 5 tiers here, best, valuable, balanced, underpowered, and the worst. If you wanted to make your own tier list, you don't have to stick to those 5. You can make as many or as little tiers as you want. That's the joy of a tier list. Another thing is I'm not going to be ranking them off aesthetics at all. I'm not going to have the voice acting, the model, the animations, the powers like connectivity to their source material. I'm not going to be looking at any of that. I'm simply going to be looking at the powers themselves and like the gameplay applications, not the aesthetics. And of course, this is all opinion based. If you guys have different opinions than me, like, oh man, why is number 2 at the very top? I think he should be at the very bottom, and here's why. Leave a comment and let me know. You guys can make your own tier list if you want. I'm just using Photoshop to make this, but there are plenty of other ways you can make your own FusionFall tier list. But without further ado, let's hop into it. We're going to be going one at a time through the nano order. So we're going to start with number 1, and that is Buttercup. So Buttercup right here, as you can see, Buttercup has a stun power, stun cone, she has group heal, and she has scavenge. Those are very, very good powers. Buttercup is actually one of the few nanos that has 3 like really solid powers. Heal is probably one of the best abilities in the game. The fact that it is group heal doesn't necessarily diminish it at all. It's just like a little side note. But scavenge is also a very, very good power. The worst thing about Buttercup is just the fact that she's forced to get her worst power, which is stun. Because obviously when you complete the tutorial, you're forced into getting misfire as your power. So if you want like a better power than stun, you are kind of forced to go through the process of a nano power change, which does cost quite a lot of fusion matter and taros. But just looking at her power straight up, especially with how early you get her in the game, she is extremely, extremely useful. Especially if you change to scavenge. She's one of the few nanos that will help you get past the level disparity around level 29. And she's probably the best one for that, because we'll look at the other scavenge nanos later. Because of all those reasons, I'm going to put Buttercup up here in valuable. I think she's a very, very valuable nano. She's definitely a great addition to any team in the B slot. Depending on no matter what power, she can be your healer. She can pull off a little bit of damage with the stun. And she can also help you with more utility with the scavenger. She's probably one of the better, if not one of the top Blastons nanos for sure. So we're going to move on to number 2. Number 2, codenamed Kids Next Door. He is the second nano you get. His powers aren't the best. As you can see, he has a run self, a group recall, and a bonus. So just talking about his best power far and away is run self. Especially because, as I said earlier, you get it so early in the game. You get it level 2, which means that you don't have vehicles. You don't have access to vehicles for another 8 levels at this point. And he is one of the few nanos. He's actually one of the only 2 that have the run power. So if you want to get places very, very quickly, not even very, very quickly, if you want to like increase or decrease, I guess, the amount of time it takes to get between waypoints and places without having to spend money on like the Skyway agents or the scampers, number 2 is probably your best bet, especially just because of the other Adaptium choices between here and level 10, which is very, very, very sparse. The only problem with that is while his run is very, very good, Group Recall isn't. Group Recall is probably the worst power in the game. Well, Group Recall is one of the worst powers in the game. We'll have a little bit of a discussion later when we get to some other powers. And bonus really isn't the greatest either. It's really just for farming, and even then, it's really only good for farming once you've already completed your fusion matter meter for the level. But it's not bad. It's not bad. Don't get me wrong. Bonus is definitely not a bad power to have, and for that reason, or for all those reasons, I'm gonna shove him up here into the balanced tier because I think he's great, especially early. The run power, especially at level 1. Really solidifies him being like a great early nano. It's just that the other 2 powers are not the best, especially for the A slot. There are a lot of better nanos for an A slot, especially later in the game, but early in the game he's probably your best bet at like an A slot nano. Third, we're gonna go with Eddy. Eddy is I'm just gonna say it right up, he's one of the best nanos in the game by far. He has a heal self, he has a group run, and he is a guard, but guard, not the best power. Guard's a pretty bad power, especially in the future because there aren't any enemies that like steal your boosts and potions. But it is nice to have, but it's not necessarily something that you want to take up a nano slot for. But its other 2 powers, self heal, especially because he is your actual first heal nano, unless you go through and change Buttercup's power, which not many players necessarily do at level 1. And he also has group run, same value as number 2. It's just he has a difference. He's in the C slot, not the A slot. But he has the same value of number 2's run, except it's even better because it's group run. So if you and your friends are in a group together, you're the only one. Only one person needs a run nano, as long as you guys are relatively close to each other. And it's just immense value out of Speedy Getaway, his group run, and then Jawbreaker Break, of course, as a heal, allows you to grind. It allows you to do missions, like it allows you to attack mobs for missions for a lot longer than you would. You don't have to wait for your health to regen. You have to use heal straight up. He is by far one of the best nanos in the game, and for all of those reasons, I'm going to place him in the best category. And I personally believe he is in a contender for best nano in the game. So we're going to move on to Eduardo. A lot less hype around Eduardo than Eddy. Eddy, of course, very, very good. Eduardo's not bad. He does have a heal. He has heal area. The thing with heal area is that I believe it actually heals you specifically less than Eddy's heal or Buttercup's heal would, which does diminish its value a little bit, but it's still a heal, especially because it's an A slot heal, and you wouldn't have an A slot heal at the time. Number 2 obviously doesn't have a heal. His other 2 powers are not bad either. Well, he has radar. Radar is bad. Radar is is for contender for the worst power in the game, which is why his powers aren't necessarily the best. But Drain is a really, really good, really, really solid damaging nano power. I really enjoyed Drain, especially if you use it against like a boss such as Don Doom Bad Max. You do drain a lot of health from them, and it's very, very good for taking out tanky monsters due to its damage over time effect. But really nothing too special about Eduardo. There really isn't any reason to use him over, say, any other nano. Not that I'm looking down the list. Like Grim kind of serves a lot of his purposes. In terms of damage, something like Jack would serve his purpose as well. But for how early in the game you get him, I can't necessarily complain. I'm going to put him in balanced alongside number 2 because he's not bad. Drain and heal, great powers. Radar does hold him back a little bit, as well as the self-heal, or not the self-heal aspect, the area heal aspect on Papa's Fritas. So we're going to move on to our past nanos now. We got Blossom. Blossom, of course, has a stun. She has a stun area. She has an antidote, and she has freedom group. Now, these powers are not very good. They have their uses for sure, especially with the group freedom aspect of everything nice. But the problem is there are a lot more useful things to put in your Nano slot for your Cosmics Nano. Especially, you already have Eddy, who we've already discussed is a very, very, very strong Nano. And there are some Cosmic Nanos later in the game that also will fill this spot very well. Forearms, Professor Utonium. And a lot of them just overshadow Blossom. Like, her stun's okay, her stun's great. But there are also a lot more offensive options if you're looking for a C Nano. There are also a lot, like, Antidote's a great power, don't get me wrong, but isn't necessarily worth an entire Nano slot for. So I'm going to put Blossom into our underpowered, our first one in the underpowered category. We do have a nice spread of Nanos so far. And now we're going to move on to Wilt. Oof, Wilt, buddy. So Wilt has 2 snares. He has a snare cone, I believe, and a snare area. But he also has a jump. And he's your first Nano that has a jump, which is really, really great for platforming and stuff. So he's not bad. He's not necessarily a bad Nano. It's just the fact that he has no flexibility at all. Because snare is not a good power. Snare is probably one of the worst active powers, if not the worst, besides sleep, that you can get on Nano, and he has it twice. But the big thing about Wilt is it doesn't necessarily matter that he has 2 snares. It's more of the fact that he has jump. And jump is very, very good, especially because he's the first one you have, and you're not going to get another jump until preferably Professor Utonium, but no one gets jump on Professor Utonium, so probably no jump until Bubbles, which is a pretty far way down the line. So Wilt's not bad necessarily. He has 0 flexibility. He's going to be a jump Nano, and even then, you can probably fit, like, especially Mandark. Mandark kind of outclasses him completely. However, you get Wilt a lot earlier than you get Mandark. So I'm going to put him in underpowered. He's not in the worst category by any means, but he is a bit underpowered just because of the fact that he has 0 flexibility on his powers. So we're gonna move on to Dee Dee. Dee Dee's number 7, and Dee Dee ain't bad. Dee Dee ain't bad at all. Now, similar to Wilt, she has 2 of the same power. She has 2 damages. She has a damage cone and a damage point, I believe. Oh no, damage area and damage point. But she has a group revive, which is very, very useful. It's your first revive power. Revive, not necessarily like the best power in the game, but with group revive, it's actually, I'd say, very, very useful. Just because of the fact that if you and your friends are doing kind of like a hard mission, and you don't want to keep losing your friend over and over again, damage revive group revive is actually a very good power to use, especially in the B slot, because you can take out Buttercup for this pretty easily. You can take out Wilt for this pretty easily. And even later in the game, she outclasses a lot of B Nanos, especially damage. Damage is a very, very solid power. I'd say it's probably the most balanced of all the powers, because you know what you're going to get. It's just like some damage on the enemy. And it's not necessarily bad at all. So she's a very good, like, kind of offensive / supporty Nano, and you can definitely fit her in a team comp very, very easily. So I'm going to put her in balanced, because there's not necessarily anything fantastic about her. Like, group revive is great. Damages are great. They're great. They're just not, like, fantastic. And they're also not necessary. Similar to Buttercup and Eddy, they have very, very great powers that are also somewhat necessary at times. Dee Dee, not necessarily necessary, but great powers. I definitely recommend a Dee Dee Nano. I just think she's balanced, and balance isn't bad. Balance is not bad at all. We're going to move on to number 5. This one gets a bit cooler. I very much like the number 5 Nano. She has, I think, bar none, the best power in the game, which is Leech. Leech Point, probably the best power in the game. Rocket's a close second, I would say, but for our talks right now, let's think Leech Point. She also has Revive, so fills kind of the same role as Dee Dee. The only problem is it's Revive Self, not Revive Group. So you can't necessarily revive your teammates. You can revive yourself, though. Sneak Group, not necessarily the most useful power of all time, but if you're trying to, get to an area and there are a bunch of monsters in the way, Sneak definitely has its purposes. Sneak's probably her worst power out of the 3. However, Leech, best power in the game by far. Revive, very good power. Sneak, not a bad power at all. I'm going to put number 5 in the best category, or number 5 in the best category, because of Leech, specifically because of Leech, and also because so far, if you get her, accessibility, you get her level 8, she's miles better than Buttercup, miles better than Dee Dee, miles better than Wilt. And even later in the game, she outclasses him, she outclasses Mandark, she outclasses Mojo, she outclasses a lot of Blastons Nanos. So she can really compete for that B spot for a long, long time. And I think she's one of the best Blastons Nano in the game. So, move on to, oh, poor Double D. We're going to move on to Double D at slot 9. I know if you've played FusionFall before, you probably know what I'm going to say. Double D is, if not the worst Nano in the game, he's one of the worst, if not the worst Nano in the game. Look at his powers. Oh, look at his poor powers. He's got Treasure Finder, which is just the same thing as Radar. It's not good. He has Snare, as we talked about earlier with Wilt. Not good at all. And he has Recall, which only is good very, very late in the game. And by the time it's good, you're gonna have a bunch of good Cosmic Nanos. You're gonna have Aku. You're gonna have number 4. You're gonna have number 3. You're gonna have like Vilgax, Swampfire. You're gonna have a lot of decent Nanos that are just far and away better than what Double D can provide. So not too much to talk about with him. I'm just gonna slowly slide him into the worst category because, oof, they really did him dirty with the powers, especially compared to Eddy, who has some of the best powers in the game. So we're gonna kind of stick on the same Double D train. We're gonna talk about Megas here. Megas might have just as bad powers as Double D. The only good thing about it is he has Sneak. Sneak, as I said with number 5, isn't necessarily bad. Sneak Self is a lot worse than Sneak Group for the same reasons. But he has 2 Sleeps. Sleep is garbage. Oh, Sleep is very, very bad, and he has 2 of them. So this is a very similar situation to Wilt, where he has 2 really bad powers of the same type. But he has like a 3rd power. The only problem is I would value Jump so much more higher than I would value Sneak, and for that reason I can't justify myself putting him in the underpowered category because of that, because he's basically just a worse Wilt without Jump. But I'm going to throw him in the worst category alongside Double D, unfortunately. So let's move on to Billy. Billy has Freedom Self, he has a Sleep Area, I believe that is. Yep, Sleep Area. And he has a Damage. So, not necessarily the best powers in the world. Obviously, we talked about Sleep. We've talked about Freedom a little bit. Freedom is good. A lot of people don't really see the value in Freedom. Freedom is actually very good, especially when fighting against bosses. It's slept on quite a bit. I'd say it's a very decent power. Damage also very decent power to have, especially in the A slot. You have Megas, and he easily outclasses Megas, and he easily outclasses things like I would say he outclasses Eduardo as well. I wouldn't say outclasses Eduardo. I'd say he's pretty around the same level as Eduardo, especially with his damage being compared to Eduardo's Drain and his Freedom being compared to Eduardo's Heal. He's a bit worse than Eduardo, I would say. But not in all ways. That's because Eduardo does have that Radar. However, since he is like a bit worse than Eduardo, I have to put him in underpowered just because he is like a bit worse, Like, if it was a competition between the two, in terms of Drain versus Damage, I would take Drain every time. And if it was in terms of Heal Area versus Freedom, I would also take Heal Area every time. So he's just a bit underclassed compared to Eduardo, which is why he's a tier below. So now we're moving on to Professor Utonium, and he is probably the best Nano for movement. Just you look at his powers. Drain's like a great power to have. Not bad at all. But where he really shines, and that's why you know it's going to be a good Nano if Drain is his worst power. He has Jump Group and he's Rocket. Rocket is competing with Leech for best power in the game by far. It offers you so much mobility and control when you're platforming. You can change direction, you can change your speed, you can, judge a landing with Rocket very easily, and it's also perfect for obviously getting to new, places you couldn't normally jump to. And obviously Jump's a great power. We talked about how great of a power it was with Wilt, but Group Jump allows your friends to also benefit from the reward. The only problem is that you're normally going to choose rocket over group jump every time. I know a lot of people who prefer group jump though. But it's no secret that Professor Utonium is often talked about as one of the best nanos in the game, and I think everyone is right when they say that. He is definitely in the best category for sure. Okay, let's move on to Him. Him, one of the most questionable choices for a nano, and he does not have bad powers at all. He has a Drain, similar to Eduardo. He has a Freedom, similar to Billy. And he has a Area Heal, similar to Eduardo. So he's he's basically a straight upgrade from Eduardo. The only problem is he's Blastons and not Adaptium. Him actually has very, very good powers. Freedom, nothing to sneeze at. Drain, nothing to sneeze at all. And Area Heal is very good for utility when you need it to be. He is, as I did say, he was better than Eduardo, but he is not, I wouldn't say better than Buttercup. Actually, never mind. I'm going to put him right next to Buttercup. Because, my reasoning, Buttercup has a better heal than he does. They both share a heal, but Buttercup has a better heal. Him has a better source of damage. Buttercup has a stun. Him has a Drain. Drain wins. And then, Buttercup also, kind of has Scavenge. Him has Freedom. They're sort of like these utility kind of abilities. I would say Scavenge is better, but I would definitely choose him over Dee Dee and Eduardo every time. So I'm going to put them in the same tier. However, Buttercup still has an edge above him. Next we got Blue Kazoo. Blue's bad. I'm just going to say it straight up. Blue is very, very bad. Not as bad as Eduardo or Megas. But he's still, I'd say, very, very underpowered. He has Treasure Finder, which is garbage. He has Snare, which is garbage. So he basically shares all of Double D's powers, but he has a stun. And the stun does kind of save him a little bit. The only problem is his other two powers are just so not worth getting at all. He's easily outclassed by Billy. He's outclassed by Eduardo. He's outclassed by number 2. He's outclassed by Dexter. It's just like... there's very little reason to use Blue, and really the only reason you would is if you get a stun. But I do want to put him in the worst category, but I just said he is better. He is outclassed compared to Double D and Mega, so I think I'm going to drop him in underpowered just because of the stun. Because at least the stun kind of redeems his nano a little bit. He's by far not like the worst nano in the game. There are a couple more that would definitely fit into the bottom category. Actually, I'm gonna drop him into the worst because I don't want to put him next to Billy. Billy is miles better than Blue is. Miles better. Actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna move Billy up, put Blue there. Perfect. So, I know I said Billy is kind of like a worse Eduardo, but he's not. It's similar to how Him is like kind of like a worse Buttercup, but only by like a little bit. That's kind of the similar situation. So Billy's like a slightly worse Eduardo, but that doesn't really change the fact that he's in the same tier. Blue is better than these two for sure. And I would definitely value him along the same as like Blossom. That's also the problem with working with only 5 tiers. I could make more, but I didn't want to get too confusing. So, Bubbles is next. Bubbles is pretty good, I would say. Bubbles is pretty good. She has a jump. She has a self-jump, especially for a C slot. Jump is very, very useful. Damage, very, very useful. And then, like, Snare is whatever. Snare, no one's going to pick Snare, but still, it's not the greatest power in the world. Bubbles is... She's good. She's just like a all-around, I'd say, good nano. I would argue that she is very, very valuable due to the fact that she's a C nano with jump and a C nano with damage. Both of those are not necessarily the most rare things. The only problem is she does get outclassed in 2 levels by Forearms, but we'll talk about him in a second. I would just say she's balanced at the moment. That's all I'm gonna say. She's balanced. Jump is very, very good. Damage is very, very good, but she does get outclassed, especially when the person she gets outclassed by is 1, Professor Utonium, which you already have earlier, and 2, Forearms, which we'll talk about in a second. So, moving on to Demongo. Demongo is good. Demongo's pretty fine. He's got damage. He's got damage area, similar to Bubbles. He's got snare, also similar to Bubbles. But he does have a revive, which is, I would value it a little bit less than Bubbles, but obviously not as much, especially because they don't share the same slot. She's Cosmic, he's Adaptium. I'm going to throw him in Balanced, just because his powers are fine. His powers are great. He does suffer from the snare, unfortunately. However, his other powers greatly make up for it, and I'd put him along the same lines as like Billy and Eduardo. I'd value them about the same. So now we move on to Forearms. Oof, baby. Forearms is, also, if you played this game before, you know what I'm going to say about Forearms. He is very, very good. He has Leech, which is kind of like a deal breaker already. Leech is best offensive power in the game. Scavenge is one of the best utility powers in the game. And then Sleep kind of brings him down a little bit. However, the fact that he has both Scavenge and Leech on a Cosmic slot Nano puts him in the best tier. He is by far one of the better Nanos to have, especially because you get him around the time where your C Nano slot is either Utonium or Eddy, and he can definitely outclass Utonium. It's him and Utonium and Eddy are all kind of like fighting for this C slot, and they're all equally worthy. Eddy for his heal, Utonium for his mobility, and Forearms for his damage / utility, depending on what you want. So number one is also a very good Nano. He is, I think he's better classed than both of the Blastons Nanos in A tier. He's got a damage, he's got a regular heal, and he's got a bonus. So he's similar to Buttercup. There are a little bit of trades though. So I wouldn't necessarily, actually I take that back, I wouldn't necessarily class him higher than Buttercup. I'd say he's about even with Buttercup, so I'm going to put him here, but I'm going to keep talking about him. So basically he has damage, which is better than her stun. He has heal, which is, it kind of mulligans with her heal. Her heal is actually a bit better because it does work with groups. And then of course she has Scavenge, she has bonus, and I would value Scavenge a lot higher than bonus. But it's not big enough for him to jump an entire tier and move to the top tier. That's just my opinion. I think he's a very, very strong Nano to use. He's probably like one of the strongest. I know Blastons has a lot of strong hitters, but he's a very, very strong Blastons Nano, and I would value him at the around the same level as Buttercup and him. So we're moving on to our second half of the Nano lineup now. We have Mojo Jojo. He's got a Group Freedom, he's got Drain, and he's got Guard. Not necessarily the greatest selection of powers. It's a very, very respectable selection of powers, though. I've talked a little bit about Freedom. It's a lot more valuable than people kind of lead it on to be. Drain, also very, very valuable. Guard kind of holds him back. The big thing with Mojo is, I'm going to put him in Balanced, because I think he's very, very balanced of a Nano. The biggest thing with Mojo is that he is outclassed by him for his Drain. He's outclassed by number 1 Buttercup, number 5. This kind of like 4-stack up here kind of outclasses him, and I put him around the same level as Dee Dee. So Mandark, another Blastons Nano. He has Stun. He's Group Jump, which is very, very valuable, and he has Antidote. I'm also going to say that he is kind of in this balanced state. Group Jump is a really, really good power. Stun and Antidote, not quite as much, but they still have uses. But then again, if you wanted a Group Jump, Utonium is probably your better bet. If you use Utonium for Rocket, then Mandark as your Group Jump makes quite a lot of sense to grab, actually. Actually, I think I might bump him up a little bit, just because of that. Nah, I'm just going to leave him in Balanced. Grim. Grim is going to be a bit of a surprise. I'm not sure a lot of people really see the value of Grim. Grim is by far the best Nano in the game if you're in a group. If you're in a full 4-stack group, Grim is a must-have in at least one of the 4 Nano squads. Because his powers, they're all group powers. He has Heal Group, Run Group, and Revive Group. So if you're in a group and at least one of your group members has Grim, you have heals for the whole group. So necessarily not everyone needs to waste a slot, not necessarily waste a slot, but use a slot up for a heal nano. If you have run, then you have group run. You can run, and people wouldn't have to use a slot on a run nano. And revive. You have a way to heal or revive your teammates when they get knocked down. I'm gonna throw Grim up into the best category, with a little bit of an asterisk next to him. If you're playing solo, he's not the greatest. He has great powers for sure, but he's not up to the level of these guys. If you're in a group, he's the best nano in the game, I think, in my opinion. So we're gonna move on to Dexter. Dexter is also a very popular nano. He has okay powers. He has very decent powers. He has a rocket, which is always very, very useful. I love rocket. Group sneak, same as number 5 or Megas. Like, there are uses for it. It's not necessarily the best or the worst power, but there are uses. And then recall is kind of bad. But I think the rocket alone kind of single-handedly puts him up into this valuable category. He's a very, very valuable nano to have. If you give him rocket, he kind of takes up that A slot for movement. And he does it pretty well. He's not necessarily outclassed by too much. Grim with group run and Samurai Jack eventually will outclass him, but no one else really in the Adaptium slot really has a way to provide the movement that Dexter does. Not necessarily in the way that he does it, at least, because there's no other Adaptium rockets, and then the jumps and the runs aren't necessarily as good, except for Grim and Samurai Jack, as we'll get to. So after Dexter, we're going to move on to Vilgax. Vilgax is, he's okay. The difference between him is he has 2 bad powers and a good power, which is run. Similar to number 2. Number 2 is like a bad power, an okay power, and a good power. The difference is that number 2 is level 2. Vilgax is level 23. By level 23, you'll have a vehicle, which makes run very, very not the most valuable power that you can have. It would only be useful for running in infected zones and fusion layers, which is, few and far between, because you'll normally have a vehicle for the overworld. So because of that, his run power is a lot less valuable, and I would say that it makes him a underpowered nano. I was gonna say the worst. I was gonna put him in the worst, but I don't think he deserves to be put in the worst, just because it's a Cosmics run. Eddy does outclass him, but normally you're gonna hit the heal for Eddy anyway, and you're not gonna need that. And even though you will have a vehicle by this point for sure, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't need his run for infected zones. Oh, excuse me, infected zones or fusion layers. Just because it is pretty useful. And then radar and group recall. Group recall does have like some uses in Green Maw Dark Tree especially, and Fuse's Lair, but like it's not necessarily the best, which is why I'm gonna put him on underpowered. Now we get to Swampfire. Swampfire is a really, really easy one to talk about. I'm just going to shove him in the worst. If you'll notice, if you guys remember, he has the exact same powers as Megas. The exact same ones. The only difference is that he's Cosmics. That doesn't necessarily help his case at all. He's still outclassed by all of these Cosmic Nanos up here. I would rather have any of them on my team other than Swampfire. Sneak is probably his best power, and even then he gets outclassed by other characters who have Sneak. Especially eventually, like number 3 just completely outclasses him when you get there. So I think he's one of the worst. And there's really not much to that. So we're gonna get Mandy. Mandy's next. Mandy's not necessarily the best either. She has Treasure Finder and Recall, which are not great powers. She has Group Run though. Group Run is pretty valuable, especially when you're traveling in groups along with Grim. My problem is she does get outclassed pretty easily by Grim especially, but like she gets outclassed by pretty much all the Blastons in A tier and above. But Group Run is useful. It is very, very useful. But it's not really useful enough to warrant her getting out of underpowered, especially because Vilgax kind of fills the same role as her. They have like pretty much the same powers. The only problem is that Mandy is a bit better than Vilgax just because of her group run compared to his self run. Next is Coco. Coco's not the greatest either. See, some of this mid tier or these mid game nanos, they're not the best. Guard, Freedom Group, Stun. It's okay. It's not the best. It's not the worst. Guard is pretty useless, but Stun has its uses as well, and so does Group Freedom. Not the greatest. I'm still going to put Coco. I'm going to put her in underpowered just because I would rather have Billy on my team for the not necessarily the freedom, but just for like the damage on the stun. Her freedom is a lot better than Billy's just because it is a group variant. But I would rather have Billy for damage. Actually, I'm gonna put her in balance just because her freedom is better than Billy's, but Billy's damage out option is a lot better than Coco's. But they kind of like mulligan out and cancel out a little bit there. All right, Mac. Mac is very, very similar to Dexter, I would say. So I'm going to put him right next to Dexter. Mac is very similar to Dexter based on the fact that they both have Rocket. However, and they both have Sneak as well. That's kind of weird. But they both have Rocket, which is great power. Sneak is okay. Dexter outclasses him with his Sneak. And they both have like kind of useless powers with Recall and Sleep. So I'm going to throw them together in the valuable tier. I think Rocket makes him extremely valuable regardless of what his other powers are. But is not valuable enough to get into like the best tier. All right, number three is kind of similar to Grim. Very, very useful if you travel in groups a lot. The only problem is she is kind of like not an upgrade compared to Grim, a downgrade, just because she has the group heal. Instead of a revive group, she has revive self, and instead of a run, she has a sneak. So it does have its own purpose. It does have purposes, but it's sort of just like a downgrade to Grim, like sort of just like a worse Grim. And it's so good. It's still very, very good. The heal is very, very good. Revive is very useful, and especially group like Sneak has its uses. The only problem is I would not kind of like put her in the same category as like Buttercup and Dexter and Mac. I would kind of put her similar to just for C nanos, I'd put her similar to Bubbles. That's where I kind of would value her. Hex, unfortunate. So Hex has two really big problems. One is that his powers are bad, like Group Recall, Sleep, Run. Run isn't bad, but the biggest thing about Hex is that he is completely outclassed by Mandy, who you get 1, 2, 3, 4 levels earlier. She is a Blastons Nano. He's a Blastons Nano. They're both their best powers. They have two useless powers and Run. The only difference is her power is Run Group. His is Run Self. So Hex gets pretty much completely outclassed by Mandy, which makes he also gets completely outclassed by other movement kind of enabled nanos like Mandark. He also gets outclassed by number 5 for sure, like all of them up here. So he's not necessarily a great choice of a nano in my opinion. I think he's probably one of the weakest in the game. And then we go straight from one of the weakest in the game to what I believe is one of the strongest in the game. That's Juniper Lee. Disregard the fact that Juniper Lee is my favorite show. No bias, but just look at her power. She has a leech similar. She is just following the pattern. All the other leeches are top tier. She has a jump, which jump is a very, very valuable power. And of course, snare, not the best. But a lot of these nanos up here don't necessarily have the best powers either. But I think the leech and the jump alone are more than enough to shoot her into top tier status. Also, because she is an A slot, if you're not using Grim, she's one of the best A nanos to have. She outclasses Dexter, I would say, in terms of damage and utility. Dexter probably a bit better with the movement, but still Juniper Lee brings her own stuff to the table. And I think she just kind of outclasses all the other A nanos, and definitely deserves her spot in the top tier. Next is number 4. Number 4 is he's okay. He's just okay. I would say like Group Revive is great. Area Heal is great. And Drain is great. Like he's definitely a better number 3, I would say. He definitely has a lot more versatility, not versatility, it's not even a word. He has a lot more versatility, and he has a lot more flexibility in the team comp than number 3 does. And I'm going to throw him up here into the valuable category just because he does have some great powers, and they're not necessarily like top tier powers, but you can definitely make it work. No matter what power you pick, he has a lot of flexibility in the team comp. Poor old Ed. Poor old Ed. If you look at Ed's powers, he has sleep. He has radar, and he has snare. 3 genuinely useless powers. I love Ed to bits. I love Zobaldine Ed to bits, but unfortunately they just got the short end of the stick when it came to nano powers, and theirs are really, really bad. So I'm gonna make Ed low tier. Then we got Courage. On the flip side, I would say Courage is actually really, really, really good. He has a heal, he has a scavenge, and he has a drain, which is better than Buttercup, basically just like a direct upgrade from Buttercup. So I'm gonna put him top. I would compare him very much to Juniper Lee. Juniper Lee obviously is a much better damage option, but Courage has 3 really great powers. He has a heal as well, which she does not have. She only has like the small heal on her leech. He has Scavenge, which is one of the best utility in the game. So I would kind of compare him to Juniper Lee. They kind of go back and forth, and I would rank them about similar. Then we got Jack. Jack also is a very, very valuable nano. I wouldn't say he's as valuable as Juniper Lee or as Courage, but he definitely is really, really good with the group jump and the damage. And even Antidote isn't necessarily like the worst thing in the world, especially later in the game. There are a lot more places where you can get like infected damage that Antidote might be helpful for. I am going to put him up here in valuable, just because I think he's a very, very good nano. Then we got 2 more left. We have Aku. Aku has pretty respectable, I would say, respectable powers. He has a stun, he has bonus, and he has damage. In terms of like the C slot, he kind of gets outclassed by number 4. He gets outclassed by Utonium for sure. He gets outclassed by like Forearms, Eddy. But it's not necessarily like the worst. I would put him around the same like kind of area as Bubbles and number 3, so I'm going to throw him in balanced. And then we have one final nano to go. I wish I could end it on like a good note, but Humungousaur isn't necessarily the best. In terms of Freedom's a good power, but he does get outclassed by a lot of other Freedom nanos. He get like Blossom is just as good, if not better, in terms of like a Freedom C slot. His damage is respectable, but Snare is not necessarily the best. Since he gets kind of outclassed by Blossom, I am going to put him in underpowered, just because he has a Freedom Self, she has a Freedom Group, she outclasses him, and he also has, but he outclasses her in terms of damage, because he has a damage, she only has a stun. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. This was going to be our nano tier list that we kind of made for fun. If you guys liked the video, please drop a like, hit that subscribe button so you guys get notified when I post more videos similar to this, or some other kind of concept. I really, really appreciate all the support. Turn on that bell if you guys wanted to, because I made a promise last video. I said if you rung that bell and told me in the comments, I would give you guys a nice shout out. So I'm going to give I'm going to give 3 whole shout outs right now. We got 8-Bit Sandwich, thank you so much for turning on notifications. We have Alexander Rainey, thank you so much for turning on notifications. And A Mills, thank you for turning on the bell all the way back from whenever you did it the first time. And thank you for leaving it on this entire time. You guys are truly, truly the best. But that's going to be it for me. If you guys really thought this nano tier list was a good thing or a bad thing, if you guys hated the order I put the nanos in, or you liked them, let me know. Tell me where you would rank them, what you would do instead of what I did. And of course, similar to the last video, if you guys do ring the bell and tell me about it, I will give a couple of you a nice crispy shout out in the outro. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys later. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace.